a second while the other chat loads. There we go. All right, guys, tonight we are getting back into the subject of chemical enlightenment, Gnosis through psychedelics. Last time I did the stream, I was a little bit pressed for time, so we didn't really get to all of the really important bits on this subject. So I thought it would be a good idea first to consider what is enlightenment, what qualifies as he says, cool toad video. Yeah, I don't know if you guys all saw the Bufo toad video that I just released. It's kind of just a little short primer on the subject. We'll probably talk a little bit in this stream about that subject as well, because for one thing, it is kind of touted as the psychedelic that has the most capacity to bring people to enlightenment, to immerse them in the ultimate unity consciousness. The way I describe it is that most psychedelics bring down part of the filter in our nervous system that reduces the sensory input down to something manageable, whereas 5-MeO-DMT turns the entire system off. So it's a really important psychedelic, and there's a lot of controversy and issues that are relevant to it. So yeah, we'll get into that. But what is enlightenment? What is illumination? How do we measure this? How do we ascertain, is someone genuinely enlightened? Is it even real? If you sit and breathe for long enough with the expectation that you're going to eventually be submerged in this infinite nothingness and you're going to have this experience of enlightenment, you're likely to imagine that experience even if it's not a real thing. It's kind of like heaven. People say it's there, but there's not really any evidence for it. So what constitutes enlightenment or illumination? Is it kindness in a person? Do you become all-knowing? Does it mean that you have sudden access to occult powers that are off limits to the profane? And the real answer, I think, to all of that is yes. Although, if, in my own research, for example, I've noticed that there are different types and degrees of illumination. There are people that have attained very high levels of knowledge of the deeper underworkings of the universe that did not become nicer people, So it's a complex and nuanced subject, but I think most of us, when we talk about spiritual experiences and spiritual development, we are basically talking about self-improvement. So let's take me, for example. I grew up in a very violent, low-income, surrounded by ignorance, literally even inbred people. My parents were or at least one of my parents was extremely abusive psychologically and emotionally. And so I had a lot of issues when I was younger. I was dangerous to an extent. I had a violent temper. I could be very controlling and jealous with my girlfriends. And psilocybin mushrooms really were the first catalyst that started to reduce all of those behaviors. And over many, many years, unfortunate actually how many years it actually took for me to work this stuff out to a reasonable degree. But other psychedelics played fundamental roles in this. And so if enlightenment, illumination, is the realization that we're all fundamentally connected, and exposure to a greater reality that causes us to modify our behavior so that we are not dangerous, and it changes our conduct in a way that is congruent with, the general gestalt of life, then yes, absolutely, psychedelics are a legitimate inroad to this kind of self-improvement. And, there are also innumerable people that were shallow, vapid, that, like Mike Tyson in the Bufo video. I never thought I would see that as long as I live, Mike Tyson talking about having smoked 5-MeO-DMT and even crying, he's crying just recalling the experience. And it brings you into a sort of exalted state in your day-to-day existence. Speaking of day-to-day existence. Another criticism people offer with psychedelics is that you go in there and you get these insights and you attain to higher levels of wisdom, but then when the drug wears off, it goes away. This is not true. It's just not true. For one thing, the experiments with 5-MeO-DMT in particular, the changes in the brain, the formation of more and more complex and stronger dendrites, the main consequence of that, strengthening and multiplication of these dendrites, is memory enhancement. And so the experience is retained, and the brain actually physically changes in order to accommodate the retention of that information. Along these lines, one of the things that I have suspected for a long time is that, the changes in the brain, the physical changes in the brain, are often credited with, the ability to rewrite patterns and help us overcome addictions and PTSD and all these sort of behavioral aberrations and whatnot. But what is it that is causing these accommodations to occur? They are happening in response to something. And I think that something is that the brain has to physically change in order to accommodate this new level of perception. We used to, in the 60s, even up until the 90s, you don't hear this phrase as much anymore, which I think is really unfortunate, but the expansion of consciousness, the expansion of the mind is often cited as a, quality conferred by psychedelic experience. And I think that that's exactly what's happening. The brain has to physically change. The hardware has to evolve and upgrade in order to accommodate running the new software. And so to me, that is proof that there's actual mind expansion occurring in the brain. Even further, and this might be even more remarkable, brain scans have been done at places like Princeton on people that have psilocybin and LSD in their system. And there's electrical activity in parts of the brain where there never is any otherwise. And they compared this to meditating monks. And they don't even have this electrical activity in the deepest part of their meditations. And so it appears that, as Terrence McKenna said, in criticism of those people that claim that you can get higher with drugs than without them, there's a physical, experimental, research-based, evidence for this. It also begs the question, do psychedelics actually lead to cities? And the cities are things like telepathy and parapsychological phenomena that in certain schools of Buddhism, the masters would tell the student, when these arise, ignore them. And there's a good reason for that. D.T. Suzuki, who I mentioned in the last stream, he took LSD and said that it's like storming heaven and stealing secrets by violence, right? So you're supposed to ignore these cities at first because you do not have the toolkit, you don't have the capacity yet to distinguish between genuine intuition and wish demons and all sorts of other things that can lead to confusion and dissolution of the sanity, really. But, ayahuasca and other psychedelics have a long-standing reputation going all the way back to explorers like Sir Walter Raleigh that encountered shamans in the jungle that could describe the Eiffel Tower and the pyramids and all of these kind of places. I personally have experienced telepathy a number of times with psilocybin and particularly ayahuasca, very almost predictably, it's very consistent, these parapsychological experiences with ayahuasca. And you do increase, or they do increase, the instances of these experiences. So Daniel Pinchbeck actually referred to it as an occult hangover because he noticed after smoking DMT or DPT or something that synchronicities and precognitions and these sort of things would increase in their frequency of occurrence for weeks and months even after these experiences. And so I think the fact that we don't normally have these capacities of consciousness engaged in our daily life, it seems to be intermittent, even with the best and most advanced shamans and occultists. No one, to my knowledge, has really been able to demonstrate a consistent ability to precognize or to be telepathic. These things are fleeting experiences, but that electrical activity in the brain in places where we don't normally use it, I think probably corresponds to this. And I think it's probably part of the next step in the evolutionary paradigm that we acquire these other capacities of consciousness that are sort of fringe experiences in the present moment. Let me check in with the chat. Appreciate your perspective. I appreciate you being here. By the way, you guys, do me a favor, hit the like button, share, subscribe, consider becoming a patron. We are demonetized, so we don't get any support from Babylon. Babylon got no love for me, man. Also, you guys, feel free to pop questions in the chat. We do not have much of a group tonight, which is a little bit disappointing because this is such a fantastic topic. But yeah, if you have any questions or comments. So, you know, while I'm thinking about it, actually, let's divert a little bit and talk about the toad. 5-MeO-DMT is an extraordinary compound. It's something that is kind of arriving in the consciousness of the mainstream at exactly the critical moment, which is one of the extraordinary things about these compounds. You know, a lot of people say that DMT seems to intersect with you at exactly the moment when it is appropriate. And I think the microcosm, macrocosm applies here, you know. Just as the individual will encounter these things at exactly the moment that it's needed, the collective is also having that experience. And so, you know, in the current modern paradigm, we do not have time to sit in a temple and meditate for 50 years. We have to change consciousness now. We have to raise consciousness now. We have to heal our lineage now. We have to integrate the shadow now. We don't have time to wait. We have to take an accelerated path. And 5-MeO-DMT seems to represent a gateway, an inroad to that is more effective and reliable. And actually the safety rating is 10, according to studies that I've looked at. It's the highest possible safety rating. Although, and that brings us to the downside of this, there is a lot of shady business. And this actually relates in a couple of ways to the theme of tonight's live stream. Because it is true that there have been 5-MeO-DMT shamans that have turned into cult leaders, and they have abused people, and they have become egomaniacs. And so the very valid criticism is, if this is such an enlightening compound, how is it that this occurs? Why is it that there are dangerous levels of ego inflation that happen? And, you know, there's a complex answer there. And one of the things that we have to be clear about is that there's no panacea that is perfect. There is no magic pill that is going to 100% of the time give us exactly the result that we are hoping to get. There are people who have chemical and other types of bad wiring that are, you know, narcissistic or sociopathic or even psychopathic, and these compounds probably actually just amplify these characteristics and make them worse. However, in the majority of people, that's not the case, and that's what the research shows overwhelmingly. But to talk about the shadiness in a little bit more depth, there is no good evidence that Bufo has been used by Mesoamerican cultures prior to 1970. And I posted a comment or in the community, you know, asking people if you know of any good research papers or even pictures of art, something that I'm missing that suggests that there is a tradition around toad venom smoking, please let me know. And some people commented, one person said, "You're so lost," as if not knowing and asking for direction for research is, that makes me lost somehow. I thought that was a bit over the top. But they directed me to a certain tribe that I was already aware of. And here's what happened. And there's plenty of documentation of this. This toad shaman, who is apparently a very shady and dangerous individual by the name of Octavio, he somehow became aware of the toad, and he went to the Seri, which is part of a larger nation of tribes. I can't remember the nation name. It starts with a C. And he brought a group of people, and they deliberately went around and seeded this rumor that there was a multi-thousand-year-old tradition that had been lost. And because the indigenous people in this area are super poor, and he told them, "You'll be able to make money," they sort of went with it. And so now there's this sort of widespread belief that this tribe has this multi-thousand-year lineage of Bufo shamans. It's not true. And it was a very shady person that created the rumor. And on top of it all, if you go and watch videos of them doing these ceremonies, you'll notice a couple of things. One of those things, especially considering this particular group has no history, no tradition of plant medicine. They had no peyote, no tianacot, no mushrooms, nothing. So they do have a shamanic tradition that involves sweating and masks that are used to try to frighten spirits out of people, but there is no history of any plant shamanism. And so these supposedly ancient ceremonies that they're doing, you'll notice they have suripanga is what the Quichua call it. There's another name here in Peru, but I was taught suripanga. Suripanga limpiezas or chacaras that are used they're like plant leaf shakers that are used to cleanse the energy of a person, and they're doing chants. Where did they get these 1,000 years ago? They're in the middle of the desert. Suripanga grows in the Amazon. What are they doing with these? And why are they using the same techniques of shamanism that are used in Peru? It's not real. So I just wanted to touch on that because, it's also a safety issue that if you have people that are saying, we are part of this lineage of ancient Mesoamerican toad shamans, it's not true. It's not real. There's no such thing. So, just wanted to touch on that because it became kind of a contentious issue in my community posts. Checking in with the chat. Yeah, so there's that. The application of psychedelic medicine for the process of illumination goes back thousands of years in the mystery traditions and in shamanic traditions in South America. But as I was saying in the last part of this stream, context is everything. There has to be intent, there has to be a protocol, there has to be determination and there has to be a clear and concise, defined intention as to what you were trying to accomplish and why you were trying to accomplish it. Assuming that these conditions are met with an adequate protocol, there is absolutely no limit to the potential for self-improvement, the acquisition of capacities of consciousness that we generally don't even accept as being real in our society. And, this time period that we are, I don't even know what, I don't want to say confronted with. I'm trying to frame it as if all of the chaos is opportunity. That's how I see it. This period of dissolution, this period of dissonance, this period of chaos is nothing but raw materia, prima materia, to create a new phase in humanity and a new phase in human evolution. Somebody asked, have I heard of IFA? No, I have not. What of plant-based 5-MeO such as Yopo snuff or Illinois bundle flower? Yopo snuff, I think, is more 5-HO-DMT. And this is an interesting thing because the toad has like 85% of the venom is 5-HO-DMT. The thing about 5-HO-DMT is that it is not very psychedelic. It is more nauseating than 5-MeO-DMT or NN-DMT. And when you smoke the bufo toad venom, the effect is very much 5-MeO-DMT. And what is the name of this heat-based transformation of, I think it's exogenous, endothermic, exothermic? It's either endothermic or exothermic reaction, where by the application of heat, a chemical is transmutated into something else. And so my suspicion has always been that heating the 5-HO-DMT converts it to 5-MeO-DMT. And I've read that that's not true, but then I don't understand why does it seem that way? It does. I've taken 5-HO-DMT and 5-MeO-DMT, and 100% the toad experience is 5-MeO-DMT. So I don't know what exactly you're asking about the plant-based versions of 5-MeO-DMT. But I can offer that it is extremely uncomfortable, Yopo, compared to other methods of administration. It is very, very difficult body load and lots of purging. So I definitely would prefer the toad over the plant-based sources of 5-MeO-DMT. Anything else in the chat? Exo gives off, endo takes in. Yeah, it's one of them. Exothermic, I think, is when it's heated and then it transforms into another compound. So now I'm thinking that really all I missed in the last stream was the fact that I think that the brain actually makes these adaptations because of the experience. It has to expand. It has to upgrade the hardware in order to run better software. And now I'm thinking I don't have a whole hell of a lot more to say about this that I didn't say in the last stream. I think protocol is what I'm seeking. I've been taking high doses of psilocybin and have experiences, abilities otherwise couldn't achieve, or at least, well, he says protocol is what I'm seeking. And the thing is, in order to really maximize your investitures from using psychedelics, it takes a lot more than just using psychedelics. You know, one of the most important things is to have the ability to self-psychoanalyze, to have the commitment to be really mindful, and to have the non-judgment of self, to really engage in objective analysis of your behaviors and your motives, and you know, to be able to analyze yourself without having shame and guilt and resentment, even when you figure out, you know, that it was your mother that saddled you with some kind of, you know, trauma or issue that you have had to live with that has manifested as all sorts of problems and dissonance, interference patterns in your life. You know, you have to have the presence of mind and the wisdom to say, it was her mother that, you know, that influenced her in this way that caused her to influence me. And that goes back and back and back and back and back. And eventually you realize that there's no one to blame, that this current of negativity that was passed down through the ancestors, it's no one's fault. And our parents and their parents and their parents before them were not aware and awake to the degree that younger generations are. There is an acceleration in evolution as well. I think that's one of the great benefits or advantages that we have right now when we're looking at, say, the political circus in the United States, and the younger people are just going like, whoa, how can it be this blatantly obvious and this completely insane? And yet you see the boomers, all kind of going along with it and completely engrossed in it and completely invested in it. It's because of the telescopic nature of the evolutionary paradigm. You have 10,000 years from hunter-gatherer to agriculture, and then 1,000 years from agriculture to the beginning of industry, and so on and so forth. The technological revolution happens in a matter of 50 years. And so things just accelerate and accelerate and accelerate. And so we have this tremendous gap in understanding and consciousness and the level of perception between younger generations and older generations. And so that actually gives us the opportunity to disrupt the continuum if we walk with knowledge wisely and act right, add the right spice at the right time to rise above all the dirt and grime. And that spice is 5-MeO-DMT, NN-DMT, ayahuasca, psilocybin, LSD, mescaline. Again, assuming that it's all done within the framework of knowledgeability. We have to do the work to create fertile soil for these seeds, or else they're just going to blanch the soil and drain the nutrients, and nothing will be accomplished. And for me, that mostly consists of, as I was saying, of the ability to self-psychoanalyze without guilt, blame, and resentment for yourself or others, and then the pursuit of knowledge in all relevant areas to whatever your purpose is, self-enrichment as a primary directive in your life, self-discovery, self-enrichment, and this analytical skill set. You combine that with psychedelics and you have a tremendously powerful recipe for transmutation, transformation. So that's what's up. It also helps to have knowledge of the medicines, because all of these psychedelics have overlap in terms of effect and their similarities. Mescaline is a phenethylamine. It's not really related to LSD or psilocybin, DMT, but yet there are some similarities in the visual aesthetic and the general feeling of mind expansion and being able to receive new insights and to shine the light in the places where you have been unable or unwilling to look. But they are all highly specialized as well. So this is another reason why the first prerequisite is self-knowledge. You have to know what you need and why you need it. What is it that you're trying to address? And then you have to match that with the appropriate medicine. And for most of us, I think in this modern paradigm, we have had so many toxic influences, and especially depending on your age, how long you have undergone exposure to all of these things. It can take a combination of things. Psilocybin has certain applications that it is best suited for. 5-MeO-DMT does as well. And there's also the fact that it can be necessary for certain people depending on their level of entrenchment in the matrix model, the matrix mind. The ontological shock from even ayahuasca, but much less something like 5-MeO-DMT, can rattle a person to the extent where it could cure PTSD or it could give you PTSD. So this leads us into one of those sort of corners, a dark alley, where we have, some conflicts, because it is true that people should not be denied access based on their financial status. That is a huge impediment for a lot of people. At the same time, without someone that has had a lot of experience with these things and can offer guidance, you can get yourself into a lot of trouble. So what needs to happen is that communities need to have a shaman. Families need to have a shaman. The the trap of capitalism, really, that, like for me, I don't really have a choice. I have to make a living. I have a family to feed. I have to survive, and so does everyone else. So it's really difficult to just give your time away for free. People that I work with, I spend countless hours talking to them before their experience, after their experience. Then I'm spending time with them during the experience. There's no way that I could just invest all of that time for free. At the same time, it's a tremendous hurdle that we have so many people that are in need of guidance and medicine, but don't have the ability to compensate anyone for it. This is something that I really don't have any answer for. For the time being, until we are able to re-engineer the system so that it facilitates, meeting the basic fundamental needs of the people that it has destroyed, the machine has destroyed. We have to re-engineer the system in order to facilitate the mass awakening that we really need to see happen. The problem is it's a cart before the horse thing. Like, if we need a mass awakening in order to re-engineer the system, but the system is in the way for the time being, it's a very tricky circumstance that I'm doing my best to navigate, but I don't have all the answers either. It's not cocoa leaves, it's coca leaves, and I actually have a little bit of coca paste in my cheek at the moment. See, what's the question? What does it feel like? It feels like very, very mild cocaine, because that's what it is, really. The leaves are about 1% cocaine, and they also have all sorts of alkaloids and enzymes and tons of calcium, which is interesting because the calcium is an activator for the cocaine alkaloid, and the plant actually has really high levels of it to make the alkaloid active a little bit naturally. But we use this is Yipta. It's not in focus, but there are lots of different kinds. Actually, I have a few here. This one is like really strong and is some kind of burnt substance, probably with quinoa. This one has mint in it, so it's kind of sweet. But what I was getting at is that it has all sorts of cleansing agents, and even one of the enzymes changes the way that your body metabolizes, so it starts burning fat instead of carbohydrates. It also changes the oxygen content of the blood in order to help with altitude sickness, and the plant happens to grow at very high levels. All of this stuff to me is evidence of the universal mind. This actually, what is it? Shilajit is a mineral, and some occultists talk about a baseline intelligence even in the mineral kingdom. And if you consider that Shilajit is great for altitude sickness and only is found way up high in the Himalayas, very, very interesting possibility that I don't think it's just a possibility. It's a reality that nature has placed these things in the places we need them to be. Yeah, coca is different than cacao. I thought I saw another question. Have I ever been locked out by a medicine? Not exactly, but there was a period when I was younger when I was smoking DMT pretty often. And one time, I mean, it was years after this before I smoked it again. But I smoked it and everything just was chaotic and weird, and I knew something wasn't right. And the DMT said, "Why are you even doing this at this point? You know, you have gotten all the information you need to deal with your life. As you know, there's nothing here for you. What do you want to watch cartoons? Are you trying to go insane? Like, what are you doing? Don't come back." You know, and that's an experience that I've heard many times from, I don't know if it was Terrence McKenna. I know Robert Hunter, the lyricist for the Grateful Dead, said that he smoked DMT once and this door just slammed in his face and they said, "Don't come back." Oh, and yeah, he was asking Terrence McKenna if he thought that it was important to take that seriously or not. So I did for a number of years. I did not return to that realm until I was sure that it was a good idea. I always set an intention and the medicine shows me what I need to see, but I struggle to integrate the experience. Any tips? Well, yeah, I mean, it's difficult to just give like a generalized protocol for this. You know, the type of information, the context, what's going on in your life. There's a lot of, you know, relevant bits that really come into play to do a good job at that. But there are a few things that I can say. One of them is that once upon a time, I was having nothing but chaotic, ridiculous, absurd hallucinations from ayahuasca. And at one point I was laying on a deck in the jungle somewhere and there was like this ultra modern Japanese painting kind of looking affair of like this trolley. And it was just dumb and it wasn't even moving, you know, and I was staring at this thing for like 5 minutes and I was like, why the nonsense? You know, why, give me something I can use. And the medicine's response was, the mind works in a language of symbols. So just because you don't understand what you're looking at consciously doesn't mean the subconscious mind isn't aware of it. So there's that, you know, part of it is that overthinking some of these things can be fruitless because the communication that's important is with the subconscious, you know, and patience is important, but also meditation after the fact. Many times it has taken me days, weeks, or even months to realize what something meant from a psychedelic experience, you know. And there are, you know, plants and what are they called when you take like vitamins, supplements and whatnot, that can just help you retain information if you mean it in that respect. You know, you can take colloidal gold is a tremendously helpful anti-inflammatory, and it sort of lubricates the entire mind and just sort of helps the brain to build itself and to retain information and increases the electrical conductivity, you know. So that is a tremendously helpful thing. Learning to lucid dream is a great way to increase the communication with the subconscious and to unearth these things that are lurking in the shadows that we need to shine a light on and drag out and integrate. Okay, so another thing that, you know, is really important, just building habits in places where you need to build habits. You know, if the medicine gives you some kind of instruction or you have some kind of revelation that you need to retain, one thing that is really good for this that we do in my ayahuasca circles, and it's a tradition that comes from the Shuar, is to take liquid mapacho tobacco through the nose because it snaps the mind into focus, and I believe it helps to hardwire, to sort of take a snapshot of the things that were experienced and help you to retain them in that way. But one of the most important things is that you just take action, actual, meaningful, substantial action, immediately, the next day. Whatever the imperative is that is given, you have to actually act on it in some kind of real way. And you need to continue to do that and make it habitual. You can't just sit there and think about what was being communicated. You have to actually put it into action in some way, shape, or form. So Trey's saying that you need a good trip, like a 3.5 at least of mushrooms. That's an interesting thing, and I think that these high dose experiences are important for the really deep, revelatory kind of experiences, the life-changing level. But it's worth noting that they say that above 2.5 grams of your average kubenzas, the neuroplasticity and neurogenesis that is a massive benefit of taking these substances actually decreases. You reach a point of no return. And so if you are going to take a heroic dose of mushrooms, this is something you do not want to do too often, because it actually is, in a sense, setting you back, at least in terms of your actual physical neurons and neural nets. And not second guessing yourself too much. Well, a lot of this stuff needs a lot of context. I mean, sometimes the best thing you can possibly do for yourself is second guess yourself. But that can also be a terrible mistake. So again, it just depends on the context, what actually makes sense. I've been wanting to work on my indecisiveness. Well, for me, I was sort of born with my true will in the front of my awareness. I've always had the same sort of obsession almost. I never have had to ask, what am I doing on this planet? And because of that, everything else in my life falls in behind this prime directive, right? So that, I think, is the main thing. You have to determine for yourself, what is it that is of absolute fundamental importance in your life? What are you here to do? You must constrain every thought, every deed, every breath to one singular purpose. And then when you have to make these, auxiliary decisions or ancillary, I don't know which is a better word for it, those decisions are informed by how they relate to this main directive. So that's the best way that I can help you to address that. You have to have one thing of prime importance, and then everything else is determined based on how it relates to that prime directive. Okay, so I said something about how DMT has a reputation for intersecting with people at exactly the right moment. And so somebody's ascend world, I don't know how, that guy is saying, do you think that means the plants choose their shamans? I don't really think about it all that way so much, or the chemicals. I think of it more in the context of a universal mind, and symmetries that are sort of integrated into the fabric of reality. So I don't think of it so much as like ayahuasca picking someone. And this brings up a pretty contentious topic, really, because in this day and age where we have this massive pop culture interest in these things, and there's a huge profit motive, and allows people to escape the matrix and all of these things that anyone would want to do, there are a lot of people that, and also there's just human fallibility. Somebody drinks ayahuasca twice and decides the medicine is telling them that they need to be a shaman. In my opinion, it's something that you are born with. It is not really something that, I'm not saying it can't be learned, but I think that in most cases, when people decide that they're going to sign up for a 3-year, there are schools in Arizona and stuff that supposedly can teach you to become a shaman. I don't think that's real. So, what you're asking there are people that are predisposed to these things, and I think it's generally a subjective experience that tells a person which of these plants or medicine is their primary tool. But no, I personally don't really think that the plant picks and chooses who the teachers and the shamans are. Yeah. So let me see. Thought on the comparison of other mushroom species, specifically Natalensis pancyans. Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that because I was actually looking into this yesterday. I think not deliberately, it just kind of came up somehow. And the official position of science is that there is not a sufficient amount of irodocene. I don't know if I'm probably not saying that right. Baeocystine. That the other components, the chemical components of the mushrooms that would potentially contribute to an entourage effect, are not present in significant enough quantities to have any kind of effect. I don't buy it at all. There have also been beta carbolines, harmalas, recently detected in certain mushroom strains in different ratios. And I actually have P. natalensis in mycelium, just about ready to fruit, but I haven't eaten them yet. But I can comment on pancyans, and there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that the body load is significantly less. The clarity of the experience is much greater. The only mushrooms that have ever made me feel like absolute death are cubensis. So 100%, I think that there is some entourage effect that comes from taking different strains of mushrooms. It is a difficult thing to ascertain for sure, though, because your set and setting, your diet at the time, all sorts of variables contribute to how you experience psychedelics. So it's really hard to say for sure, but I think the consistency, I had never read anyone else's experience of pancyans before I took them, and my assessment exactly matches that of the consensus of psychonauts. So, I think that we can go ahead and assume that it's actually true that the scientists just haven't figured it out yet. All right. Do we have any more questions or subjects for me? What strain made me feel bad? Just many times. Cubensis, there was a couple of occasions actually. One time I was at a Fish concert and I ate a bunch of mushrooms and it was just the worst feeling. It's hard to explain. Something kind of like a flu, but worse. And it's a very specific feeling. Yeah, and it's happened to me 2 or 3 times, but only with cubensis. Yeah, the pancyans are strong, but they're also very clear and they don't have much body load. Do the levels of understanding end? Is there no point of higher doses at some extent? No, it seems to me that consciousness is infinite. I've drank ayahuasca countless times at this point and smoked DMT, probably 100 times. And it never runs out of new configurations. Every single ayahuasca experience is different. No, I did not puke at the Fish concert, luckily. The only time I ever vomited from mushrooms was the very first time I ate them, and I puked on the window of this car. And I remember there was some kid in the house. We got to this party, my friend's BMW, and I said something about having puked out the window. And this kid went out and ate the mushroom pieces out of the vomit on the window, which was absolutely wretchedly disgusting. But no, as far as this level of understanding, it doesn't seem that there's an end to the road of wisdom. I am often surprised after all these years of constant seeking and searching and refining, my ability to even look for knowledge in the first place and to do thorough research and even on a personal level, like in every domain, the new insights and revelations still haven't stopped. I'm 45 years old and I've been doing this forever with the different occult traditions and different psychedelics. And I am still consistently baffled that there's so much that we are able to learn, and also how much we're able to miss over time. The most obvious things can be hidden. And I'm not saying that means that a person should just constantly gobble high doses of psychedelics all the time. I mean, there are periods in my life that was the appropriate thing to do, and I'm sure that applies to just about anyone. But, just to answer objectively and honestly, no, I don't think there's any end to that particular road. Let's see the other chat. Okay, I'll give you guys a couple of minutes to pop questions into the chat. Are you a lucid dreamer? If so, can you share some of your experiences? What's funny about that? There is a plant called Toei brumansia, angel's trumpet, devil's trumpet. It has a lot of names, Floripondia. The flowers have the widest spectrum of alkaloids, but they are weaker than the leaves, and particularly the pith inside. Like if you break the plant open, it has a pith inside. It's pretty dangerous. But the flowers I use for insomnia and inflammation. And when you take that plant every single night, you will have crystal clear dreams and you will remember every bit of it. However, I do not recommend this as a general practice for people. Some people are sensitive, and it's not. I have a tremendous amount of experience. I lived in the jungle for years and I know what I'm doing. So I'm not suggesting that anyone else should try this. But yeah, and also it's used for like prophetical dreaming, and that definitely happens. The first time that I accidentally took a little bit more than I needed for sleep, I ended up having the dreams that I couldn't, well, they weren't dreams. Like I couldn't tell if I was awake or asleep, but the trip from these plants is until you get to really high doses, which are pretty dangerous. You cannot tell the difference between reality and the hallucinations. They're true hallucinations. And there was a guy, it's standing up next to my wall, a professor, and he had a professor's stick, and he was pointing at these Egyptian symbols on the wall and explaining them. And the next day, my AI generated exactly the same image that he was pointing at with his stick for a thumbnail. Exactly. So, yeah, I have lucid dreams. The thing is, though, like in terms of actually being able to take over the dream and become an active, like you can manage them and kind of do anything you want if you get to a certain point. I barely can do that, and usually if I become aware that I'm asleep, I'll wake up. So if that's what you mean, then no, I haven't quite mastered this. For very brief intervals, I've been able to kind of like become conscious and make things happen, but generally no. Yes, I had the McKenna. The Datura, Judge Dredd, Datura is basically the same alkaloids as in the Toei that I was describing. Yeah, the dry throat and blurry vision is pretty bad, and if you take too much, even for sleep, the next day, you'll like, I've woken up the next day and gone out and there were birds flying and there were two, but there was only one, like double vision. So yeah, that is a definite obnoxious side effect. Asunder World says, I've read on higher doses, you're in control of the experience. I don't think that's true at all. In fact, the original practice of shamanism, the shaman took the ayahuasca and then he just looked at the body, the energy grade of the person, or connects with their, creates a thought loop with their subconscious. And that is how the healing went down. In the case of Toei, the shaman does not drink it, only the patient does. And then he sits and watches over you. And the reason is that scopolamine in particular, which is one of the alkaloids in the plant, causes you to be extremely suggestive. In fact, prostitutes and robbers, particularly in Colombia, will make a powder. And one of the tricks, for example, is that they'll write something really small on a piece of paper and then ask you to read it. And then they'll blow it in your face, and then you will have sex with them, or or take them back to your house and give them your life savings or whatever it is they tell you to do. Even a more extreme case of that, in Haiti, the zombie phenomena is actually where the witch doctor will make a... it's not just scopolamine, there's pufferfish venom and other things, and they use it to create a zombie. And then the person will appear to be dead, they're buried. God, man. They appear to be buried, and there's an antidote. And depending on how long the witch doctor waits to give the antidote, you have increasing brain damage. So 3 days makes a good plantation slave, 5 makes a good sex slave. There's different protocols for different levels of zombie. And so the spirits of Brumanzia are supposedly not good or bad. They are very impish. Oftentimes, they will take the form of some weird skeleton and they'll give you secrets of the universe, but then they'll collapse into a pile of bones. And when they collapse, you forget what they told you. But because you're so highly suggestive, whatever these spirits tell you to do, you will do. So they will oftentimes tell people to drink cups of sand, for example, because your throat, like mine apparently all of a sudden, is really, really dry when you take these alkaloids. And so drinking the sand, you're going to choke to death. So the shaman just watches over the person. They don't take it themselves. Yeah, lucid dreaming, definitely a powerful tool for exploring your consciousness. In fact, just keeping a dream journal is a really important thing. If you join a Hermetic secret society like the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn or the OTO, I believe, every magician has to keep a dream journal where when you wake up, you write down what you dream immediately. And after doing this for a while, you can go back and look, and you'll see all sorts of interesting things, precognitions and patterns, and you'll realize that the subconscious has been weaving a tale for you through these dreams. But if you don't maintain the continuity of mapping them, you won't consciously pick up on all of it. So it's really important to make these records and then go back and become consciously aware of the communications from the subconscious. Did I like the Makani? Yeah, they were good. Not too much body load. That's the thing that's the most important to me. I really hate body load from anything. Morning Glory seeds worth it? No. Generally, no. It's very difficult to dose them properly, and it's similar to LSD, except that there are headaches, nausea. Generally, I would suggest just getting a hold of some LSD. if you're going to go that route. What about nutmeg? I heard it's also psychoactive. Yeah. What's up, Peter? Nutmeg, what is it, myristicin? I think, MDA. The MDA cluster consists of 12 different drugs, MDMA, DOM. They're all very different. MDMA mixed with MDA, I think, is really the perfect thing, because the MDA that comes from sassafras, for example, is a little bit more psychedelic and less like speedy. And so if you mix them together, you kind of have the best of both worlds. So I always really liked to mix the sass with the MDMA if I was going to take MDMA. But taking nutmeg is going to give you bloodshot eyes, headache, nausea. It's a little bit dangerous, very uncomfortable, tremendous hangover. Back in the days, in the 60s, like Malcolm X and whatnot, people that were addicted to heroin when they were locked up would get a hold of nutmeg because it was legal. People could bring it to you in the jail even, and they would use that to try to get through their withdrawals. But I wouldn't mess with it if I was you. I live in Sri Lanka. Everything is illegal here. You know what? That never stopped us in the U.S. But I know in Sri Lanka, I think you can probably get your head cut off for being in possession of contraband. So probably you might not want to take that risk. Have I had Amanita muscaria? No, I have not had Amanita muscaria because I'm not really interested in just altering myself for the sake of altering myself. Deliriants are not really indoor ring psychedelics, and again, unless it helps if you sun dry them, because I can't remember which is which, ibotenic acid and muscimol, one of them is more toxic and less psychoactive, and so when you sun dry them, the more toxic one converts to the more useful. But no, I've never been interested in that. Really. Can incense affect the experience? Yeah, absolutely. Copal is used in a lot of ayahuasca ceremonies. The indigenous here in Peru, you go into the stores and there's massive, piles of different different types of tree resins. And it absolutely does. Some of them are actually a little bit psychoactive as well. Still looking for questions and subjects. Please share some things I appreciate about Datura or related plants. Well, I have a Halloween bit of trivia for you. I do appreciate the insomnia and inflammation that they fix, that application. But probably the most interesting thing about these plants, aside from their medical applications, atropine is used to restart the heart and heart attacks. Scopolamine is used for nausea as seasickness pills. But the popular image of a witch riding on a broomstick, do you know where this comes from? You're never going to look at a witch on a kid's lunchbox around Halloween again after hearing this story. So mandrake, deadly nightshade, datura, different combinations of these plants. The roots were boiled down and made into a paste that was put on the end of a broomstick, and the broomstick with the paste on it was applied to the vaginal walls, and it was a flying ointment. So the assumption is that at some point people stumbled upon this ritual the witches were doing in the Dark Ages in England, and they had the broomstick between their legs and they were babbling about how they were flying, and that's where the popular image of a witch on a broomstick comes from. So that's probably the thing that I appreciate the most about Datura. Have you ever had Salvia divinorum? Only a small dose, and I think it's absolutely terrible. I would never smoke it. I think what happens is that it dislodges the consciousness from the in a similar way that 5-MeO-DMT turns off the filtration system in our consciousness and allows us to experience the underlying fundamental reality, something similar, except it doesn't take us out of this plane of existence. It just detaches your consciousness and it can end up anywhere. So, you hear stories of people that have lived 3 years with a family of underwater aliens somewhere. And the guy, this was on a podcast, he came back and he's like gagging because he only knows how to breathe water now. Or somebody becomes a button on their shirt and they remain that button for 150,000 years. And the thing is, science has a suspicion, physics, that time is not actually linear. That it's all happening at once. And so if the mechanism that causes us to perceive the arrow of time is in our mind, and then you circumvent that, when you spend 100,000 years as a button on your shirt, it actually is 100,000 years, because your consciousness is no longer subject to this illusory time arrow. So that's another reason that I'm not really interested in salvia. I don't really feel like getting trapped as a couch for, 250,000 years or whatever. Yeah, no thanks, guys. No, I did not ever experience a time dilation thing on salvia, but I did on DMT once. I was catapulted out of my body and spit to the bottom of the ocean, and there was like a trilobite swimming by my face, and every day, every second of every day went by for 65 million years or whatever the period is, and I crawled up out of the ocean with the fish, they're growing legs when that happened, and then nothing could see me, luckily. I wasn't getting eaten by tyrannosaurs or having to run or anything. But every day, the sun comes up, goes down through all of the different stages of humanity, civilizations rising and falling. And, I'm just living forever, just a ghost walking around ancient Rome and all these places. And then it started to speed up towards the end, and I walked past my body, and I was in the future because I'd gone past my body physically, and so space and time are connected, right? So I went past the body in the future, and there's a voice on a megaphone saying, "You are all now under martial law. All constitutional rights have been revoked, and everything's on fire, and it's all post-apocalyptic." And I turned around, and I could kind of see through the different intervals of time, and I saw my body, and I realized if I jumped into it, I'd be in the present again. So I ran and dived and landed in my body, and I set up, and I was totally normal back, but millions and millions and millions of years had transpired. So I got a lot of thinking done. Another interesting thing is that I've been able to check some of the historical shit that I observed, and it was correct, which is pretty mind-blowing. Do I think the concept of alchemy came from the use of psychedelics? That is definitely possible and very likely, because alchem has its etymology in the Arabic word for Egypt, I believe, and it is likely that it came from Babylonia, Syria, Egypt, which is the same place where the mystery schools emerged, and those mystery schools incorporated psychoactive beverages as a fundamental part of the practice. In fact, the EPOP of the Illuminati grade in the OTO comes from the Apoptiae, which was the inner circle at the Eleusinian Mysteries. And the profane were the people outside of the mysteries, but also in the outer order. And every secret society I'm aware of to this day still has this concept of inner and outer order. For the Freemasons, for example, the 33rd degree and above, which most people don't even know there is an above, but there is the inner circle, or the inner order, and the outer order is 32 and below. So anyways, the people that had drank from the Kaikion were the inner order, the people that had this experience of transcendence, and the people outside were the outer order. And that's what distinguished them, right? So The fact that Plato and Aristotle and many of these other great Greek minds that really sort of gave the foundation for our modern ontology and sciences and everything, they all drank this kykeon, and they knew about atoms and all sorts of things that you would think that ancient Greeks wouldn't have been able to figure out, that turned out to be correct. So I certainly do believe that psychedelics were not only a catalyst for art and spirituality, but also for science, because Pythagoras, Plato, Aristotle, and many others were mystery initiates, which mean they had consumed psychedelics. And in my opinion, the kykeon was probably acacia rue. So acacia with the DMT, and rue, Syrian rue for the harmalas. Because those plants grow in both Greece and Egypt. And so they were accessible to people in those mystery schools. Pretty crazy. Is there any chance to become crazy with these trips? Kind of. Yeah. I mean, the science on this tells us that unless you are predisposed to mental illness, meaning schizophrenia or something of that order, you will not go insane from taking psychedelics. It's only if you're predisposed to mental illness. Unfortunately, the only way to find out if you're predisposed to mental illness, except for the fact maybe your mom or your uncle or something is schizophrenic, that could give you an indicator. But you're not going to find out if psychedelics are going to, trigger these things unless you take them. Blue Lotus, nuciferine. In my experience, it's a pretty mild compound. It's good for sleep. People use it as an aphrodisiac. Supposedly enhances lucid dreaming. I've only taken it a couple of times. The first time I took it, actually, it was smoked, and it was mixed with Damiana, something called Indian. I can't remember. But I was actually hitchhiking, and this wealthy Hispanic woman and her daughter picked me up, and it was odd that these two did not seem like the type to be driving around smoking this weird plant mixture. But I got in the Escalade, and they're like, "Here, man, you want to try this?" And so I smoked a little bit of it, and I felt, it's difficult to describe, but it felt like my third eye just kind of popped open a little bit, like my intuitive faculty. I just had an awareness that it was suddenly enhanced. And they said, "What do you think?" And I said, "Yeah, that's what I told them." And they said, "Yeah, that's what we said." So, it's interesting. If I had better access to it, I would probably prepare it and try it at a higher dose and see. But, that's something that the Egyptians were absolutely obsessed with. And I think one of the obvious things to do is, when you see a culture that has done something that is so extraordinary that we still can't explain it to this day, look for their consciousness catalysts and take them. It seems logical to me. All right. So does anybody else have anything for me? Because otherwise I'm going to remind you that we have space open still in May in Manu in the Amazon for the retreat. We have space from November 15th to December 15th in the Sacred Valley, which is going to incorporate mushroom foraging, ayahuasca, bufo, San Pedro, combo, yopo, all on the menu, depending on when you're here and who you are and what you need. I don't mean all of these things at the same time, obviously. But yeah, you can shoot me an email about that. And then also please hit the like button, share, subscribe. Consider becoming a patron, because you get access to 6 years of premium content. And we're demonetized and get no support from Babylon. So consider supporting us. If you like us. Mushrooms help my friend PTSD. Do I do one-on-one lives? Yeah. You can purchase hours of my time, either on Patreon or via email. And is pineal calcification legitimate? That's a hilarious question because the pineal gland actually consists of 2 calcium carbonate crystals that rub together a little bit, so they're piezoelectric. So the pineal gland is literally made of calcium. So if you decalcify it, you're going to destroy it. I mean, but there is actually calcium buildup that can occur. But it's hilarious that it actually, its fundamental constituent parts are calcium. Any protocol to fix? Yeah, DMT. DMT literally activates the pineal gland. No, my email is in the description of every... here, I'll put it in the chat. Every video and every live stream, the email is there. But that's mountainnosis@gmail.com. Yeah, activating the pineal gland. DMT actually does that. I've told the story a million times on the channel, but I'll briefly again. When I learned this in the most undeniable way possible, I drank ayahuasca and I could see through my forehead. All of a sudden, a mosquito landed and bit me. And when it bit me, I realized, because I saw it coming, even though my eyes were closed, but when it bit me, I realized, holy shit, that was real. And so I sat up with my eyes closed and checked, are my hands tracking the way they should, and got up and walked around with my eyes closed and all this stuff. And I thought, man, the brain probably is capable of tracking all of this stuff. So, and it looked orange, as if I was seeing through blood and bone. Like it wasn't crystal clear, there was obviously something in the way. And the next morning I go down to see the shaman, and the first thing he said to me is, sometimes you can see through your forehead when you drink the medicine, which is the telepathic element, the sixth sense thing that's associated with an open pineal gland. So I go home and I check to see if it has rods and cones and is connected to the neovisual cortex, and sure enough. So yeah, do not doubt it. The pineal gland, in fact, I suspect that the eidetic visuals, when you close your eyes and you still see stuff, that's your pineal gland doing that. Let's see. Somebody said mushrooms helped said mushrooms helped my best friend's PTSD he got in Iraq. Yes, that will happen, but an even better way to do it, honestly. And, some people don't like this because they think ketamine is just an evil drug of abuse and that it's unnatural. It's not unnatural. Ketamine, and not something similar to ketamine, not an analog of ketamine, not a prodrug of ketamine, but ketamine was recently discovered in a mushroom. I have a video about it you guys can find on the channel. So it is natural, which honestly shocked me because it feels so unnatural. But it is the best thing for PTSD, to the extent that I had a friend who had a friend that had such bad PTSD that she would have anxiety attacks that were crippling. She would fall to the floor, flop around screaming every 30 minutes or something. Could not live a normal life. She was completely fucked. And she took a really large dose of ketamine, and she said she found herself in this clear space with a bunch of blocks that she knew were puzzle pieces that represented her fractured consciousness and her fractured psyche. And she put them all back together, and when she came out, she never had another anxiety attack 5 years later. Not once. So, when we talk about, back to the original subject of this live stream, when we talk about, the lasting changes, the criticism that psychedelics just, you get high and you think all this stuff and you come down and you forget about it. I don't know anyone that does that, for one thing. Not only that, but we have, I have seen epilepsy completely stop and never return with psychedelics, with ayahuasca, and there are other plants that maybe contributed to that. But, and in the case of this anxiety, for me, violent temper completely just gone after a certain experience. Yeah, these things are lasting and real. Am I live on anything else? I don't understand the question. I have the shorts window and the horizontal third eye. Yeah, the pineal gland is the third eye. I'm assuming that's what you're asking about. Yeah. Okay. What's weird? The Aztecs did mushrooms and DMT, and their culture was very bloody, with heart sacrifices and all. I don't know that that's their culture. That was individuals. That was the ruling elite. And, I could get into the reality of that practice and the logic behind it. And it's not what you think. I'm not saying that I endorse sacrificing people, of course, but from the shamanic point of view, or from the priest class point of view of the Aztecs, what was happening is that energies are produced by each other, right? Opposites create each other. And so the logic was that death and violence and the sacrifice of innocence was going to happen. But you could control how and where it manifested instead of just letting it affect the community randomly. They were controlling it rather than just letting it happen. The Incas here in Peru actually sacrificed children. They were treated like royalty for the last few months of their lives before the sacrifice. And they were given coca leaves to keep them awake for like a week, and then they were given ayahuasca at a really high dose the night of the sacrifice. We actually go to Temple of the Sun, which is one of the places where this occurred on our retreats. And what I'm getting at there, and again, I'm not endorsing this at all, but that was their mentality, that they were actually protecting the people at large and the city. I guess they were cities, really, the Incan cities. And the sacrifices were willing participants. They considered it a great honor. They did not believe in death. They thought, this is just a transition anyways, and it was done painlessly. So I don't know that the fact that these sacrifices occurred really means the whole entire culture was evil. That's kind of like saying that because we have a president that dropped bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that we're all evil, and that's not true. And in the case of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, that is far worse than the occasional sacrifice that was committed by Aztec priests and Incan priests. So, I'm not really judging those cultures or the medicines. And it's true that ayahuasca, for example, does not necessarily turn someone into a peace-loving vegan hippie. That is complete nonsense. That is something that has been created, a perception that's been created by, largely by the fact that the gatekeepers, who I absolutely disdain for the most part, are wealthy vegan hippie types, new agey kind of creatures. They're vegan. They're pushing an agenda. And they are the ones that are in control. They're standing between people like me and a lot of the shamans. I had a ridiculous situation that pertains to this occur a couple of weeks ago. So the reality is, if you look at the Shuar, that's how I was taught in their tradition. Ayahuasca taught them to remove the heads of their enemies, remove the skin, shrink it, and then sew the eyes and nose and mouth shut, and then it was called a sansa, and it was used to control the labor of the women they stole from neighboring tribes. You know what I mean? And the whole prohibition against eating red meat before ayahuasca, they would eat a monkey right after the ceremony. I mean, it's just not real. All of this stuff, that, just as I said in the beginning of the stream, it's all about context, and I think what ayahuasca in particular really does is it adjusts you to your environment. It's kind of like a psychological and emotional adaptogen where if it suits you to be a better killer, that's what it's going to help you with. You know, if you are in the jungle and there are spearing raids constantly, and you know what I mean, it's going to make you better at that. And if you are a yuppie from San Francisco, it's going to make you better at that. So, you know what I mean? The whole moral judgment thing, to think something in nature is going to facilitate that, you know, that kind of change doesn't really make sense. That's not how nature is. Life feeds on life as a necessary component of existence. You know what I mean? The moral component is something that we are responsible for. Reality, guys, you know. Reality. All right, so at this point I'm a bit wobbly, so I mean, I could have some more coca. I don't know how obnoxious it is. It's crazy how much coca is consumed here. You have to, because of the elevation. You will not live your best life without chewing bags of coca every day. So if you guys have any more questions or subjects you would like me to riff on, I'll give you a few minutes to punch them into the chat, and I'm going to have a little bit more paste because I'm editing videos all night, probably. And what the next one is a debunk of not only Billy Carson, but also Professor Dave. And I've been working on it forever. And they might not even let me put it up because of copyright violation. I tried to stream it, and they took it down. So sometimes it's different with lives. I might be able to post it as a video. Man, I'm going to be pissed if after working on this for so long. But it's wild. It's wild because Carson says all kinds of stupid shit that's easily debunked. And then Professor Dave tries to debunk him, and he's wrong. And I provide proof of that he's just dead wrong. He's like mocking this guy and laughing at him for being an idiot. And he's wrong. It's hilarious, man. It's an absolute slaughter of all of these people. But I kind of didn't like, I don't know, I felt like I was being a little bit Professor Davy, like my nose in the air, and you know, but it's outrageous, man. Absolutely outrageous. They're full of shit for completely different reasons. You know, the one guy, Carson, is just making shit up in order to make money. But Professor Dave is trapped in a paradigm that's dying, and he doesn't know it. The most surreal experience I've had? Holy crap, man. You must be new to the channel. Jesus, dude. I don't know. Honestly, my whole life has been so surreal. It's really hard to pin something down. I mean, I've had contact experiences and, you know, all sorts of parapsychological phenomena. And I once tossed a rock that was very likely from the Pleiades to Danny Carey, the drummer from Tool. That's up there. I mean, I guess I could share that story. It's kind of long, though. This really needs more context, but since he asked, I guess I'll do my best. So during this period of time where I was having a ton of synchronicities and a lot of rapid development, my roommate somehow got an invitation from this guy, Golden Light Eagle, who you might know from Ancient Aliens. He's a Sioux Sundance chief. They would put hooks through their chest and dance around this pole. R.I.P. Light Eagle. His real name is Lauren Zephyr. Was Lauren Zephyr. He got double jabbed and died suddenly. which I couldn't believe he did that, but that's the story. So they had this meeting in Farmington, New Mexico, because in Aztec, New Mexico, which is nearby, a UFO supposedly crashed in like 1942. And there's still weird shit in the desert. I've been there. There's like a big concrete thing, and they've measured it. It goes down 20 feet. And there's a pole in the middle that they said they attached like a pulley system to drag the UFO. And there's a bunch of old farmers that said they actually pulled little green people, little green men, alien bodies, out of the UFOs. And the thing is, in this like bumfuck ass, the Masonic Lodge is the biggest, nicest building in the town. This was not something that you would like get attention for. You didn't want to say, oh yeah, I saw aliens. You know what I mean? Like that's not likely. So it's one of the most convincing UFO crash stories. And there's a hotel and this native Golden Light Eagle invites us. So I don't know how it happened, but my roommate just showed me the email and I was like, hell yeah, let's go, So the day that I'm leaving, I call the guy because I didn't have a smartphone. It was 2011. And I wanted directions. And as I'm hanging up and he said, hey, bring your little native friend with you. And I'm like, who? And he hangs up and I hang up the phone rings and it's my little native friend. And I knew immediately. And I was like, do you want to go to this thing with me? It was, so the theme of it was that there are indigenous groups that have been in contact with what they call the star tribes for, since prehistory. And they wanted to talk about this. And so she says yes. And we weren't really friends. She was more of a client. So it was weird. And, tensions between white people and natives down there are really, really bad. So I was really surprised that she was just like, yeah. And she actually lived on the side. We didn't even have to turn to pick her up. We just pulled off the road and her house was there. She gets in the car and we keep going. And I get there and this guy walks up and he looks me in the eyes and there's like this charge. And he goes, God damn, I haven't seen you in 50,000 years. And I was like, what? And he's like, we got to get to the ceremony. And I'm like, ceremony? And he grabs me by the arm and drags me around to the back of the hotel. And there's this guy named Reynolds Kamakawia Ole. His cousin was the guy that did the rainbow somewhere over there. That Kamakawia Ole guy. Anyways, he's like the leader of the chief, the head shaman, the top dude in their tribal religion or whatever, the shaman. And he's got this like red suit from head to toe. And there's a circle forming, and I walk up just as it's closing. Like the timing was crazy. And he says, he's telling everyone to let the words come. And he comes up behind him and makes this sound like a monk, like the oh, and this really high pitched, perfectly harmonized sentence came out of everyone's mouth. And he's going around the circle. He gets to me. I have no idea what I'm supposed to say. It comes out of my mouth anyways. And then he says, may the wind blow to confirm the power of our prayer. And the wind blew so hard that like gravel blew across the parking lot. So all kinds of crazy shit like that happened the entire weekend. And after that, I went inside and this woman saw me walking up with my band and she pulled a box out from under the table. And it had all these, and there's a picture of this rock on my channel. Look, if you want to see it, it's Danny Carey and the Space Rock is the name of the video. And I promise you'll like, that's either not real or, I mean, it's insane looking. And so anyways, she pulls this box out and she has these rocks and she's like, well, they came off of a spaceship in New Mexico. They're from the Pleiades. And she gives one to each of the people in my band. And I was like, okay, lady, sure. You have rocks from another planet and you're just going to give them to some random dudes. And there was more to it than that, according to them. I'm not going to get into all of it in this space. But she had a motivation that she did give us. So all this crazy shit is happening, and I've got this rock, and it legitimately looks like it would have to be from another planet. And we worked with glass, and the only possibility that it was fake was that that they had somehow sealed rock and glass together. There were two different specimens, or two different types of specimen. One had like clear almost like glass, but if you turned it in a certain direction, it would turn purple. And then there were these like waves of red and orange and yellow that went through it. And so it occurred to me, I need to have this checked out. So I go to the college, and they're closed, but there's a door open because there's a band playing. So I go in, and I go upstairs, and there's these two geology professors, and they're shocked to see me because the doors, they think it's locked, and they had a map on the table, and they were saying the military has set their grid up here in Silverton. And a week before that, this lady in the psychic shop had been telling me about this grid the military was creating in Silverton. I thought she was out of her mind. And then I walk in on this to try to get this space rock identified. And they look at it, and they're both of them go, I've never seen, there's nothing on Earth like this. So either it's true or this is glass. And I was like, that's what I thought. So they're like, go down to this other office, and there's a guy that is like a gemologist, and he'll know for sure. So I went down there, and he says the same exact thing. It's either really a space rock or it's glass. So you need to go down to Bodo Park, which was like the industrial park in Durango, Colorado, and go to this chemical laboratory, and they can test it and see. So I drive down there, and I go in, and I get the scientist in his white coat and shit. It was like a movie, you know? And I hand him the rock, and I tell him the story, and he looks at it, and he goes, well, it's either the lady's telling the truth or it's glass. So I'm going to put a drop of this chemical on it that melts glass, and it's going to melt. So do I have your permission to destroy this thing? Because it's going to melt it. And I said, yeah, go ahead. And he put the drop of liquid on it, and nothing happened. And his eyes, like he blanched, and his eyes got all big. And so we walk outside of the parking lot, and he's like stunned. And he goes, tell me again the story. So I told him the story again. And he's just shaking his head. So I get in the car, I drive away, and I see Homeland Security sign. And I'm like, I should take it there. The government, they'll know what to do. So I pull in, I go up, ring the doorbell. Homeland Security agent comes out, and I told him the story, and he grabs a rock, and he's like, well, I'm not going to tell you that there are no aliens. The universe is huge and old. I'm not even going to tell you there are no aliens on this planet. Kind of seems like there are, but the problem is you're at the wrong department. And I was like, what? And he's like, yeah, we deal with like illegal aliens and terrorists and shit. Like, you need to take this to NASA or something. So, and I was like, can I come in? And he's like, no. So I get in the car, go home, and some weeks later, I had been noticing that I had like precognition that was happening a lot and all these synchronicities, and I thought, I'm going to prove it, that you can do things with your mind like this. So I told all my friends, you know, Danny Carey from Tool is way into all the same kind of occult stuff, and I'm going to just drive right to him and have a conversation with him. And that's what I did. I got stuck in Vegas for 3 days. We sold some crystals we had in our trunk in order to get the money to get to LA. So we pull up to this place called the Baked Potato, and I did not cheat until I was about an hour away. My friend Larissa, who was connected to the band actually, called me, and she said, you're sure as shit going to talk to Danny tonight. Are you in LA? And I said, yeah. And she said, he's playing at the Baked Potato at an open mic. And so I got that little tip off, and I pulled up, and the owner comes out, and immediately he says to me, and Danny Carey from Tool is going to be here tonight. And I'm like, what the fuck? This is real. So I park my car, and I put my amp, this amp right here, that is actually the same one I'm going to use in the music stream in a couple days. And I'm like playing 46 and 2, and Danny walks by, and he looks at me and smiles because he hears me playing the Tool song, and it hit me like this is really happening. So I go around to the front, and there's a sign on the door that says the what do you call it, the entrance fee, and it was exactly to the penny the amount of money I had in my pocket, exactly to the penny. So I go in and sit down and wait for him to be done playing, and then he goes out and he's putting his snare drum in the back of a minivan. It was like a crappy minivan, and he had all these like mid housewives with him. It was weird. It was like way too much like a normal person. And I was like, hey, Danny, can I talk to you for a minute? So we went over in the alley and we were talking, and at one point I realized I had that rock in my pocket, and I knew he was into minerals, so I tossed it to him. And he's like, that's definitely fucking weird as hell. So not going to get into the details of that conversation or anything, but I went back to, and I'm leaving a lot of craziness out. I went back to Colorado, and a couple days later I was walking down the street, and there was this Peyote Road man named Night Horse, that was walking towards me. I didn't know his name was Night Horse yet. And there was a little squat, fat one with him. And when he stopped, the little squat fat one leaned up against the window and he said, this is Night Horse. Whatever he's going to tell you. No. First, Night Horse looked at me and he said, a white man walking between worlds. You don't see that every day. And I'm like, what the fuck? And so the little one leans up against the glass and he says, this is Night Horse, the most respected peyote road man in the Navajo Nation. Whatever he's about to tell you is important. So he takes some Indian tobacco out, which is like super harsh. It's not even actually tobacco. Probably does contain nicotine. It's a different plant. And it is incredibly harsh. So he rolls it up and he smokes it until it's gone. And just like the whole thing, one big breath. And then he controls his breath and blows this cloud in each of the 4 directions. This technique saved my life, I think, in the jungle fucking 6 years later. So I ended up laying with him in a parking lot and talking until the sun came up. Like we had our heads on the, when you pull your car up, there's like the little concrete yellow thing. That was like our pillow, and just talking all this stuff. And when we got up to leave, I remember just 2 days before, this guy had told me, if Navajo ever tell you, Dene, they call themselves, if Dene ever tell you a secret, you have to give them something. Usually it's Indian tobacco. All I had was that fucking rock. I cannot believe I did this, but I thought also it was like some kind of spiritual statement that I was like proving detachment, lack of attachment or something to material stuff. I just threw him that rock. I didn't explain where it came from. I didn't tell him the story. He has no fucking idea to this day. And I have tried to hunt him down. But like I said, there is a picture of this rock on my channel. It's way at the end of the video, the best picture. And it's only, you have to pause it to really get a good look at it. There is a picture in the thumbnail, but it's not as good as the one at the end of the video. So that probably collectively qualifies as the most surreal shit that's ever happened to me. But like I said, there was a ton of stuff that was a really condensed version. Do wearing gemstones amplify ceremonies? This is something I was really skeptical of for a long time. Still kind of am to an extent, but during that same period, I got a hold of a rhodochrosite crystal, which is supposed to be for opening the heart. And I think subconsciously I've always known, because I had an extremely abusive mother. I was always really cut off from my emotions. So I think I knew I needed the rhodochrosite. This is rhodochrosite here. I still wear it. But it was a much jimmier specimen, and I had it close to my heart. And I could feel this incredible reaction because I think I was in a really heightened state in general during that time period. So, I think there is some reality to gemstones as some kind of energetic manipulating device. No, I wouldn't eat a monkey either, man. I mean, you kind of have to if you're in the jungle. Like at the Shuar, also, chicha, they chew it and spit it to ferment it. And if you go in their hut and you refuse to drink it, it's a huge insult. You're basically saying they're dirty and disgusting and below you. So, like, you're looking around, grandma's over there with 3 teeth and they're all black, and you're like looking at the bowl of chicha and you're like, oh man, but there's no choice. And if they hand you some monkey soup, you better go ahead and eat the monkey soup. Because for them, that's like the best thing you can possibly eat. Any thoughts on bloodlines? Yeah, I do have thoughts on bloodlines. I don't want to talk about it. Some of it. Yeah, I don't know what to say about that except for this. Genetic memory is proven, right? So when you look at the fact that we have initiatory lineages that protect and retain and guard information, consolidating those genetics consolidates those memories. So that's really at the heart of it. My favorite psychedelic actually is LSD, believe it or not. Context comes into play here because they have different applications, you know, for sex and connecting with your partner. San Pedro is by far the best, or 5-MeO DMT, actually, depending on exactly what you're trying to accomplish. LSD for me, because of the lack of body load, it doesn't make you nauseated. For playing guitar and, you know, doing stuff, getting better at things, it's absolutely the best. If I could choose anything, I would only work with LSD, really, except for the fact that ayahuasca addresses emotional stuff in a way, and also sort of sixth sense and parapsychological stuff is enhanced a lot more. So ayahuasca and LSD are kind of neck and neck, but as far as just being useful for enhancing memory, increasing intelligence, getting better at playing the guitar, and also in studies, both in situ and in vitro, still LSD catalyzes neurogenesis and neuroplasticity better than any other psychedelic. All the real hippies are long gone. Yeah, I mean, that does seem to be the case. It looks like, is someone like writing in Thai or something? What is this? Can mushrooms enhance precognitive abilities? Absolutely. Any psychedelic, I think, does. But again, I am yet to encounter anyone that can really do that consistently at will. You know, I am 100% convinced that these things happen. But they seem intermittent, and it even seems like there's some mediating agency that decides what you can access and what you can't at any given time based on relevance and necessity. You know, I think one of the things that people fail to understand is that as you climb the ladder of consciousness, the universal law comes to bear even more strictly, right? So the law of necessity is one of the most important fundamental bits that rules the universe. The law of necessity. Everything that happens because it has to happen. Everything that is because it has to be that way. And so when it comes to precognition and that sort of thing, that is going to apply even more. So no one is able to just get in there and scroll around and find anything they want. Obviously, we would be able to tell. If anyone had gotten to that state, we would be able to tell. Having said that, though, I always cite Maynard James Keenan from Tool because he is a person that has done this on the largest scale with the most eyes watching him, I think. The Fear Inoculum thing with the pandemic, the song Fear Inoculum that made the pandemic that makes everyone afraid of each other. That came out before the pandemic, right before the pandemic, you know. And when he was asked about that, he said that he thinks that there are subconscious pattern recognition. Well, there are, you know, and that's what that is. That the subconscious is actually, it really just has the one pattern because it's the same pattern that underlies everything. And I think the reason that psychedelics enhance our ability to access that type of information is that the communication between conscious and subconscious is increased. So these things are already there. It's not that they're just generating them all of a sudden. It's already there. But psychedelics make you able to perceive these things emerging from the depths of the subconscious more readily. Especially ayahuasca. I'm not aware of Alex Gray's YouTube, but I have met him. At Bicycle Day in San Francisco in like 2012, I think. And he was just signing posters, but there was like a break in the action and I was able to chat with him for a minute. And it was interesting because people that undergo a certain type of gnosis tend to have a affinity for certain symbols and interest in certain symbols and whatnot. And we got into a discussion about that. And it was really interesting to see that a lot of the things that I'd experienced and the conclusions that I'd made about them were identical, you know? And that's actually something that's true of a pretty wide cross section of people. Okay, we are approaching 2 hours. If you guys have any more questions or topic, I guess I'm still game. You know, it's funny when that person asked me to tell my most surreal experience. We had quite a lot of people on. And I think it was just so out there that, you know, most of them probably clicked away because they're like, man, this guy's out of his fucking mind. It was absolutely true. And like I said, there were pictures of the rocks. And it would be great if I could, you know, ever manage to run into Danny Carey again, because I guarantee you he'll remember that. You think Charles Manson was crazy? No. Yes. Both. Charles Manson obviously achieved some kind of legitimate level of enlightenment. And this is one of those conspiracy theories that is true. MK Ultra doctors and researchers signed into prisons and jails where he was being held even before the murders when he was younger. So it appears that he was being compromised by MK Ultra well before any of that shit happened. And, you know, I'm sure I don't have to tell you, watch the interviews with him, and he's brilliant. There's a level of enlightenment that goes well beyond most people's comprehension. But I think also there are stages in the Gnosis, right? And one that's very common, especially for men, is ego inflation. And during this period, it's very common for the person to believe they are the Most High God. And what's happening is they are recognizing that they are a splinter of this divine consciousness, but they get confused and think they are it, period. Everything else isn't. They are the actual Most High God incarnate. And, you know, I'm not going to say it happened to me during my process, but it kind of threatened to happen. You know, luckily I was a little bit too, like, you know, I think I know what this is. But, you know, it happens a lot. And I think he got to that point and got stuck there. You know, hopefully what happens is that you make it across the abyss. In his case, he was torn apart by the demon Karanzan, and his pieces were added to the rubble heap from which gods are made. If you were in survival mode, what plant or... You got to finish that sentence because I'm not sure where you're going with this. Shamanic visionary artistry, is there a taught path that you're aware of? There doesn't need to be. If you're interested in that, what you need to do is develop technical skills so that anything that you can imagine, you can create. You know, as far as becoming the disciple of some maestro, then go out and look for one. You know, I don't think Alex Gray is available probably unless you got a lot of money. But yeah, I mean, that's the thing really. You know, you have to develop the technical skills to deploy, to create. And then, you know, shamanic lineage is important in certain contexts, you know, but one of the unfortunate consequences of the ayahuasca industry, I think, is that people have come to believe that there's this sort of standardized protocol, and that's not real. It's not true. There isn't. And it used to be a very highly individualized path. And, you know, my teacher would always tell me, do not watch the hands of your master and go make your own songs. Don't learn mine. And, you know, and now we have people that are gatekeepers and they're egoic and they're saying, oh no, you have to learn the Ikaro exactly as it is performed. There's not a Shipibo on earth that does that. They learn them, and then they're different in every single ceremony, depending on the energy and the needs of the person, and they're never the same twice. So, you know, what I'm getting at here is it should be a fiercely individualistic path, and I would say If you are interested in shamanic art creation, you need to master your technical skills, and then you need to have the experiences and then externalize them. You don't need a teacher unless you mean like a technical teacher. Nerve regeneration. I do seem to remember recently discovering something that is Sangre de Drago might Sangre de Drago might be helpful. Yeah, let me think. And it depends on where you mean. In the brain, LSD is actually the most efficacious for neurogenesis. But nerve regeneration, I swear, man, I just made some discovery about this a few months ago, and it's killing me that you've asked this, and I can't recall what it was. It was not ayahuasca. It was not combo. Man, that's driving me nuts. I did have an answer for you, but I cannot recall what it was. What was the dosage of psychedelic you took when you quit smoking? Only about 100 micrograms or less of LSD. If you're going to use psychedelics to repattern habits, the key thing is that it's a manageable dose. You have to be able to remain completely focused. But then the combination of the fourfold breath, where you're inundating the brain with oxygen, which is the fuel it needs to do its physical work, while it's in this, more neuroplastic state, and it's generating new connections 100 times as fast as normal. You go through this process of the fourfold breath and thinking about what you need to do positively during the retention, and then what you need to let go of during the exhalation. I did this for, I think, 1 or 2 hours, and I literally didn't even remember I was a smoker the next day until I found my tobacco in my pocket at like 7 in the evening. What is it like to experience ego death with a psychedelic trip? What does a rose smell like? This is not something that really just happens once to a person. And I think at different junctures, it's going to manifest differently. It's going to present differently. So generally, it's terrifying. And what we call a bad trip, I think almost 100% of the time, what is actually happening is that people have come to identify with aspects of their shadow, aspects of themselves that do not serve them. And so they cling to them because it's part of their identity. They are afraid that if they lose this part of themselves, even though it's killing them maybe, or, worse, if they let go of it, that they're going to lose their basic fundamental self. And so they'll cling to the death to this thing. And so, how the ego death manifests depends on the predisposition to that behavior. Clinging, And there are also different levels of it. The 5-MeO DMT ego death is a whole different ballpark from mushroom ego death. In a lot of cases, people experience the mushroom ego death, and it's relatively painless. It might be a little bit terrifying. There's ecstasy involved. But when it comes to 5-MeO, there's a complete dissolution even of the observer by many accounts. I haven't actually experienced this myself. But, the report from a lot of people is that even the observer is dissipated. I don't understand how there can be a report about this if that's the case, but that's what people say. Yeah, LSD is actually, on a physical level, the most new brain growth and plasticity is achieved with LSD. Brain radiation, if you have had cancer treatment, the best thing that you can do is combo coca and Kushuru. Kushuru is a Andean, they call it Andean caviar. It's a blue-green algae that comes from the clean high country lakes around here. I actually ship it dried, but it has cytotoxins in it that actually inhibit the growth, or they disallow mitosis. So the cancer cells can't divide. So it's not a cure for cancer, but it stops it from developing. And I have a video somewhere called Andean Superfood Salad, I think. And if you watch that, all the information about Kushuru is in there. I was trying to catch up with the chat. Psychedelics heal the nerves most. Man, I wish I could remember what it was that regenerated nerves. That's really getting on my nerves. Okay, so I don't see any new questions in the chat. I'll give you guys a few minutes. Please do hit the like button, share, subscribe if you appreciate this content. Please consider becoming a patron. There are also ways to support one-time Cash App and whatnot in the chat up at the top. We're demonetized. We get no support from Babylon, so we appreciate it. If you appreciate me, you can support us. I mean, this is 2 hours now that I'm here for free, basically, at this point. I don't see. That's not new. Turkey tail mushroom. That's true. That is true. Okay. Well, 2 hour mark. I don't see any new questions. Thank you guys so much for spending this time with me. And hit the like button, please. Share, subscribe. Give me accolades by hitting the like button. And support us. That would be epic. I'll see you guys again tomorrow. We just hit 13,000 subscribers. So I'm going to do another music stream. It's been a couple months, probably tomorrow night. I'll drink some San Pedro and plug in the guitar, and we will have ourselves a little party. Good night, everyone.